Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see everybody. We've got, I'm hoping that you can see our faces now with our webcams, but please put in the chat if you can't. And I will try and get to you as well. But welcome to the ESRS webinar on social side of tailings management. My name is Jennifer Hill. I'm the current chair of Environmental and Social Responsibility Society of CIM. And please contact me if you want to get more involved, but we're happy to host today's webinar, and we're going to be recording it so it can go into CIM Academy so other people can see it later on as well. But the great thing today is you get to actually ask questions and get some responses back from our speakers as well. So the social side of tailings management. In 2020, the global industry standard on tailings management was developed and published, encompassing 15 principles and 77 requirements for tailings management, highlighting the consequences of catastrophic tailings failures and striving for zero harm. So several of these principles focus on elements of social aspects, which is our topic today. To achieve the reality of zero harm, changes in social risk management related to key issues around tailings management are necessary and critical. This presentation will highlight the shifts in thinking and practices that will help organizations meet the intent of the GIS-TMs in the social context. So we have Karen Chauvin and Monica Ospina today. I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then I'm going to pass it over to them. So Karen, she's the immediate past chair of ESRS. Karen is the founder and CEO of Enviro Integration Strategies, where she trains, coaches, and advises on various means to improve the way industrial projects are planned, designed, constructed, and constructed, operated, and closed. So over the past 20 years, she's engaged with boards, innovation communities, major projects and operations to save millions of dollars while reducing the risks of the environment and increasing regulatory and community trust in their organizations. So Karen has a BASc in Geological Engineering and an MASc in Mine Waste Management from the University of British Columbia and is a certified project management professional. Karen is passionate about sound tailings management, and she believes the greatest value can not only be derived through common goals, healthy engagement, and collaboration. We also have our other speaker today is Monica Ospina. She's the founder and CEO of O-Trade. Monica is an ESG sustainability and social performance expert and recognized experience in designing and implementing strategic solutions that support operational productivity while building trust relationships with communities impacted by mineral exploration and mining operations. Transforming social risk into opportunities in human. Her approach to transforming social capital creates value for shareholders and stakeholders and has contributed to ensuring land access and operational readiness, improving the perception of mining and the well-being of communities across regions. So in 2020, Monica was recognized as Distinguished Lecturer at CIM. She's also an author and created the Local Community Procurement Program, a sustainable supply chain model awarded by the IFC World Bank in 2012. She has also contributed to the IFC World Bank's Guide for the Early Stakeholder Engagement, which was published in 2015. And she participated in discussions groups from the Sustainable Development Goals at the Rio +20 World Convention on Sustainable Development in 2012. Monica holds a master's degree in diplomatic studies from the University of Westminster. She has completed postgrad program in sustainable management from Harvard University and international business strategy from the London School of Economics. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Karen and Monica. And as always with webinars, please put your questions in and feel free to use the chat to connect with us. So I'm going to pass you over. Karen.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Quickly looking at sharing. That's not where it is. Sharing the screen. Jen, do you need to make me a presenter to do this? Actually not seeing it on here. Sorry.
You should have there should be an icon down there that has share screen.
No.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, everyone. We should have checked this. It usually just works.
Usually it works.
Might just need to assign me.
I'm going to do that.
Technology's great. You ladies were too busy chatting offline before without checking this.
Oh, here we go. Yes. Interest control. Presenter. Okay, hopefully that works.
Yay.
Apologies.
Just a window. PowerPoint. Show this window. Aha, are we successful? Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yay. Okay, let's go. All right, let's get on here. So today we're going to be talking about the tailings area of social risk. We have tagged this as TASR. And where we came from on this is because we wanted to bring together our technical and social elements. So as Jen has already mentioned, my business and my whole career really has been focused around mine waste management and looking at how we can reduce risks and create additional value through different practices, really. We're also looking at helping mining executives make better decisions at earlier stages and helping them to comply with some of the new standards that are coming out, as well as improving their transparency and disclosures on the risks that we manage. I've had the pleasure of working with Monica over the last 2 years on this initiative. And so I'll let her just say a couple more things about it, about herself and her company before we just dive in.
Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, CIM, for the opportunity. Well, basically, the whole story starts from we want to be part of the solution, and we wanted to collaborate. And being in extreme corners, Karen in waste management and me in social performance. At the beginning, probably might not connect the dots, but as we were working together and collaborating, gosh, we really connect the dots, and that's when the TASR comes. So it is my privilege, and I'm very honored to have been working with an extraordinary woman and professional. So hope you guys enjoy the presentation, and if you have many questions, either corner, we are happy to answer. So go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, and I think I just wanted to highlight here that, you know, what we've really discovered is by educating each other on different aspects, we've both become much stronger in terms of creating different solutions and figuring out where the gaps are. And so I think this is really key to anyone who's working out there, that this interdisciplinary communications and collaborations is really where we can make things happen. So that's what we want to, you know, encourage more of today. So Monica, I'll let you dive into the case study to get us started.
Well, we pick up one of the, unfortunately, it's a well-known case of the Brumadinho in Brazil, the Vale mine in Brazil, that happens in 2019, and it inspired many discussions and questions about what is the industry doing around tailing failures. Next slide. So I'm not going to go deep on this. It's just I'm going to use this as an example of how far this could go when we ignore the social component of tailing failures. So basically, originally the site had impact back in January 30th, 2019, and it went more than 5 miles down the river, and it not only impacted the nearby communities, but also it went as far as the Brumadinho town in the residential area and urban area, and as far as indigenous towns. The next slide, please. So here you will be able to see that that goes from the Correo de Fechado in the mine by Vale, and it went all the mine tailings flood all went to the farmland in the region, and it didn't stop there because the river was very close by, and to impacted an urban area of more than 40,000 people, there's Brumadinho, and as far as 20 kilometers plus river down, you have the village on now Soja, apologize for my Portuguese, um, and it was indigenous territories that it's not only the complexity of vulnerable peoples, but at the same time, the impact it has in ancestral lands. So none of this was anticipated in terms of the how far the impact could go and who are impacted here in terms of communities, indigenous people, vulnerable groups, urban areas, farmland, and that all of these combine. And in a way, is the solution that TASR tries to go is anticipating that. But Karen, next.
Okay, so, as most of you would probably be well aware of by now, there's been a tremendous global response as a result of this failure and a few others that happened a few years prior to that as well, and caused this creation of this new global standard for companies to adopt to help prevent potential failures like this, as well as updates and improvements to some of the pre-existing guidance, that best practice guidance that has been out there for a number of years, the Mining Association of Canada's Towards Sustainable Mining program. And what things that we want to highlight here is because there has been a lot of good practice around a lot of the technical aspects, and on a social side of things, there have been some good practices, but the two things related to tailings management have not always been paired together very effectively. And we just wanted to highlight that, the things that have been, the focus has been increased on, put a lens or a laser eye on some of these things, is looking at the affected communities that may have some impacts from tailings management, and looking at the social aspects of the knowledge base that we should be compiling to help make better decisions and to inform on the facilities that we may create and the operations that we will have to manage those things. It also means that we should be doing a better job at incorporating those concerns and the risks associated into our design, into the construction practices, as well as the operation and monitoring of these facilities. And then in particular, of course, the emergency response planning and involving those potential impact communities in the planning for emergency response, so we can help minimize the consequences in the event that a failure does occur. Now, the one thing that I would say is fairly new is really more of a focus on long-term recovery and planning for what would need to be done if something has happened. Not necessarily like the emergency response preparedness has always been focused on what do we do in the moment of something happening, and not necessarily talking or thinking about what are the recovery measures going to look like. So I just wanted to highlight those particular things and pose a question like, are these really new requirements? Because if you look back in time to what has been required for mining developments overall, is that we've always, well, not always, I suppose, but for a number of years, required things around human rights, inclusion and participation, and getting stakeholder involvement in the review process of project proposals. Also on emergency preparedness, that we need to consider what was required for communities of interest and consider the impact to livelihoods for each and every development that we have. So these are not new requirements. However, what the focus has brought is how are we considering these things specifically with respect to tailings management? Because a lot of these things have come into play at the project proposal stage and looking at more generally the mine development overall. And often we have maybe I'd say, skimmed over the potential risks that are there that could impact outside of the mine footprint in a broader sense. So those are some of the things that we were seeing in practices. So some of the issues that we think we should be looking closer at is, when we actually think about what causes failures. Mining Association of Canada has presented on this a few times and noted that it's not been for the lack of standards and guidance on what we should be doing or how we need to do things, but it's really been a lot more focused around the decisions made by people who are responsible for tailings management that are the causes of the failures. And these are both individual aspects as well as systemic aspects that contribute to these decisions being made. And so some of the things we can highlight is a lack of working in collaboration across the different disciplines. And we see that even in different engineering disciplines, not always talking to each other, let alone working from the technical to the social side together. So this is really critical. We also see divides between, say, the corporate office and the operations. So we really need to get better at working on those aspects. Sometimes we're looking at lack of resources and the decisions made in terms of hiring. Do we have enough people there? Do we have people with the right competencies and qualifications? And are they fully aware of all the responsibilities that they are tasked with managing? Sometimes it comes down to that lack of long-term thinking and how we're making those decisions. Sometimes it's people don't know, like they don't actually have the proper authority to make some decisions, and or there's no accountability being assigned. So this is why some of the changes are coming into play in these standards, is to really focus in on some of these issues. So coming into alignment, I think what we want to highlight is that there's some shifts in implementation from what's required and written in the standards and the guidance to how we're actually applying those requirements, and thinking about things a little bit more holistically, through thinking of the entire system and all of the outcomes from decisions that we make, as well as improving the communications and collaborations between those multidisciplinary teams, as well as looking at inclusion of more of those social issues into the decision making and planning that we have, and breaking that fear against speaking openly about tailings and any related risks that may be there. Externally, we've seen an uprise in the communications around tailings management, partially because it was driven by the investors to sort of demand that we do this. So we have seen that uptick, but there's still a lot of work to be done. We need to get better at how we communicate risks and make it a more of an open conversation. We also need to be thinking about additional things that we should be studying to help inform on our decisions, and then incorporate all of that information into better engagement practices where we can have those open conversations. So let's move on to letting Monica chat now.
Well, so now we have seen that, yes, have been policies in place, have been standards in place, have been consideration in place, but why still it is kind of complex? So let's imagine a concession in anywhere around the world, in any geographic area. We just pick it up from here in Google or any place in the world, and we create this. So normally projects, for the permitting process, they first have the environmental impact assessment, which is the yellow line surrounding the concession. I don't know, probably if you can click, might give us.
Oh, yes. Can you see it?
Might give us, yes.
Okay.
Probably the names. Does it give us the names?
Oh, there's no names. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, yes. So the first one is the environmental impact assessment that goes in the permitting process, and is critical for the projects to move on. But an environmental impact assessment will have a social component in that. It's a chapter. But it just goes very close to the concession area and the areas impacted that is very narrow what it defines here. So does it answer the question for communities and the concerns they have and the risk to the social license? Probably not. But but for the government and for regulatory authorities, it just addresses the concern of the environmental impact and the impact to communities and social. So companies go to the next ring, that is the direct area of influence, which is the light orange. And not all the companies have it fully defined, and is still kind of voluntary and is not very technically defined unless you have a social practitioner, social scientist working with you. And the next one will be the indirect area of influence. But both direct and indirect area of influence had been working more towards economic development, job creation, supply chain, and sometimes some support in case you are sharing the roads or you are using some resources locally and things like that to keep a good relation with municipalities, or if the project lands in certain municipality, you would like to bring some socioeconomic benefits. But still, the question is, are we really addressing the risks that communities impacted will face? In our finding and in our work with Karen, we identified that the risks that they are exposed will be very different when we are talking about tailings. So next, Karen. So what is the proposed approach? So the proposed approach is we cannot have this without combining both the internal engagement and the external engagement. So this basically lands in my desk of social engagement because it's just pure stakeholder engagement, internally and external. So in this case, in the internal component, Karen was mentioning that one of the challenges is that multidisciplinary collaborative effort is not as strong as it should be, and is having an impact in the decision making. So if we have a multidisciplinary team working together about here, and here we're not only talking about the operations team, we're talking about finance, community relations, or social performance, sustainability. You're talking about water management. You're having a full group of very different disciplines acting together, and the decision making will be a very informed process. And it's a culture of change. And the culture of change is, we're going to be talking about that, is much more going towards the values, transparency, communication, access to information sometimes is critical, and the inclusion and participation that we talk for communities, guess what? Works also for the internal community. So we want them to be part of this. So what happened outside? So outside is that the external engagement, we would like the TASR to be utilized as a tool for engagement. It's a difficult engagement when you talk about tailings. Normally, this is the one that goes under the carpet, but we learned that the most important things with communities is to basically start talking openly with no fear about the challenge that we have. Keep in mind, communities is a 20, 30 years relationship. It's longer than a marriage, and this one you cannot divorce that easily. So it is really good that you go straight in addressing critical issues in the relationship.
Monica, go forward.
Yeah.
We've just had a request just to slow down a little bit on your talking. I think we're
okay. That's good. Well received. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay.
Okay, so just in respect to the multidisciplinary decision making, so there's a few challenges that have been highlighted when this practice has been reviewed by others, and we wanted to highlight some of these things here. So some of the challenges that come when you try to bring multidisciplinary teams together, or when you're not, like when you're making decisions without having that multidisciplinary group, is sometimes we're failing to consider the entire scope of the system. And so we tend to compare options for some of the components only. So for example, we're looking at the technology we might use. Are we going to do slurry or dewatered? Are we going to use one location versus another? And we look at specific, say, ground conditions for that analysis as compared to looking at all of the aspects that might have an influence on the decision that should be made. We've also, when we don't involve the right people, enough people, we often don't identify a lot of the possible alternatives that may be out there. Things that can truly reduce or eliminate some of the risks associated. Sometimes we are undervaluing the real impacts of the potential failure that could occur from any particular site or technology or combination of things that we're looking at. If we really do need different perspectives coming in to bring those impacts or potential impacts to light so that we can make better decisions. If we don't have, like if we're just using the technical folks in the room and they even are using some of the information, they could still be influenced by groupthink. And because these technical folks are used to looking at these types of analyses and assessing risk, they are much more risk tolerant. They look at things very differently than somebody from a social perspective would. So I think, you know, this is another very big reason. Sometimes we're misaligned on what is it that we're actually trying to decide. That can be something that needs clarification for everyone in the room. And of course, if we're missing knowledge, specific knowledge and information from the different types of disciplines that, or input from external stakeholders, that can really have a big impact on the decisions being made. So, you know, our key thing here is we need to involve all the right people, bring in as much information as we can to inform on the decisions being made, and have people who understand those different aspects very well so that they can be sort of justified and well explained so that they're better understood by everyone, including that non-technical information. So when we think about decision making for tailings facilities, I'm just going to throw up here different sites that we might want to consider for a property of where we might put a different facility, regardless of the technology that's selected at that point in time. The first thing that we should be looking at is how can we minimize potential consequences? And if we don't have information gathered about the potential failure, modes and mechanisms and directions of flow, and where that could potentially go from the start, you know, we're basically end up comparing, we take the assumption that, you know, all of them can fail, and then we're comparing apples to apples, but we're not really comparing apples to apples. We need to actually take into consideration of the differences between those different things and pull that into the decision-making process. And so this is the start of where we can actually apply using information from TASR and process. So I'm not going to show any sort of outlines of what that looks like right now. We'll come back to that in a couple more slides, but just to bring into this decision making of how we can use information from TASR. Monica, did you want to add anything before we change?
Well, yes, things here is interesting. As you can see, normally this is a very internal decision and communities haven't been involved, though the GISTM is calling for the inclusion of communities and the participation of communities in the decision taking. In this case, the scenario that this is the mine design. So they haven't decided yet where is the best area to place tailings, and communities are ignoring that a potential risk is close by. So for this particular, we just start kind of randomly placing this. Once again, this is just a random exercise, and we were just saying, okay, this is agricultural land. We will have an indigenous community close by. It will be a village of X number of people and an urban area close by. So when we keep it that close, that it has been basically one of the reasons that the industry has lost reputation is the lack of transparency in a risk at this high for communities. So this is just on the early stage.
Okay. So yeah, our message here is that we really need to consider the full scope of potential impacts in our decision making and not just look at the number of potential people at risk or the potential lost lives. We need to look beyond those numbers and what else is happening in those different regions, in different failure directions, and use that information to help us make better decisions. So Monica, if you'd like to introduce our TASR now.
Well, so basically what is the TASR? TASR is a methodology that defines the physical area that considers the effects of the failure and the causes and effects it has on the livelihood of people in the region. So one interesting piece here is that we designed the tool to help as many minds as possible in guiding them and working with them, and the local teams and the teams in charge of this can participate actively in owning the solution.
Oh, we can't hear. Sorry, your sound cut out for a minute.
Okay, so the criteria that we are using here is, number one, is the area subject of physical harm for tailings failure is a very scientific process, as normally has been done. The areas here will start considering what are the impacts of livelihood and vulnerable groups, understanding vulnerable groups as indigenous peoples, women, elders, children, and people with disabilities. And we added this other element that is the physical economic displacement. In so many cases, probably there are not big settlements close by, but the economic activity of communities in towns close by depends on what happened in that region. And obviously, an impact of tailings will be an impact in the income of these families and their livelihoods. So consideration for the tailing affected areas is, as Karen mentioned before, we talk about emergency preparedness, but the next part of the livelihood restoration that is considered by the World Bank and IFC performance standards qualifies these regions as people should go back to work. We don't want to have them all their life in tents. We want them to go back and see also if they can live in their houses or if they can go back to their economic activity. Resettlement might be a point to be considered on that. The land rights and land use, it's not only that we just talk about the impacted people, but it is the land rights is in hands of indigenous peoples, is ancestral land, or is a communal land, or we are talking about private properties or small farmers. It is an issue in terms of liability around that, and the important consideration of indigenous peoples and vulnerable groups that I mentioned. The next slide. So here, I will let Karen to start, and I will continue because here is one scenario. So go ahead.
Yeah, so we wanted to just present the case here. What if a decision has already been made? There's an existing facility. It was chosen, the location was chosen for, say, ground stability, preferences, and maybe it's the closest to the plant, because we do know that many times the decisions are made by proximity, how far you want to minimize the footprint of your active operations to lower costs. So, you know, we've got this site. Now what do we need to do if we want to actually look at potential impact areas? So, of course, we're looking at different failure modes and different directions that materials could flow, but and we do these dam break and inundation studies, or at least should be doing them if we haven't done them already. But what we want to emphasize here, it's not just the footprint of the inundation zone that should be considered when we look at TASR, because there are so many other impacts to the region outside of that direct inundation zone. And so we want to be able to consider what is happening within that area. As Monica mentioned, what is some of the neighboring activities that are happening? How is the land or water being used? Who else might have other properties in the area, even if they're remote, and such things like that. And then in this particular example, there's several directions that the flow could actually make it all the way to a larger city. And potentially they have water treatment capacity that could handle a flow or disturbance to the water. But there may be additional measures that need to be made to prevent like really serious impacts to a larger urban center such as this. So we really want to use this information to help make better decisions on the risk mitigation strategies we might apply if we have a high probability failure mechanism. Maybe that influences making those decisions to spend quite a bit more to stabilize that much more, or put in additional barriers to flow for lowering the consequences, diversion of some kind. But the other is maybe just additional oversight and management practices we may add to the system as well as mitigations that we may put in place in those downstream communities to prevent risks from impacting them more substantially. So Monica, maybe you can add some more things.
Yes, and from the engagement perspective and the communication and the emergency preparedness, and if you notice, and part of the big piece of work here is that when you talk about the tailings impact and you talk it in your direct area of influence or in your indirect area of influence, you create a state of panic. And that is part of the reason, in all fairness, the industry has been trying to control this in order to avoid any crisis in the region or panic in the region about tailings. So this is also another way to kind of centralize and be very effective in the engagement process. It's going to be very different, the engagement process in the areas that are within TASER, because you already know and the communities will know that this is a potential area of risk and what does it mean working together, not only in terms of anticipating the disaster to happen, but what can be done ahead in advance. And at the same time, it's happening in the other regions that are not impacted, that they will know that they are out of a potential area of impact, and their relation to the crisis probably will be that we might locate people in case of emergency in your town, so don't be surprised, you are also part of the solution. Another element that is critical here, and colleagues of mine who have been working in social, is that when emergencies like this happen, probably, let's say, was only 100 families that really occupy the land in these areas of impact. And suddenly you have 1,000 families because people just come from many other places. And this is literally out of control for the company and the municipality and the emergency people to start acting on who really belongs to the region and who doesn't. So having this study before, done in advance, allows us to understand many elements, the demographics, the considerations, who are the families impacted. We already work with them. We already have an action plan in case of being an emergency. How often do we going to communicate to them? How much we want to educate them about what does it mean being in this area, or probably nothing happens at all ever, and that's what basically the whole purpose. Municipalities at the same time, because in a case of emergency, if you have 100 families impacted and you're working with that, the number of the nurses and doctors and food that we provided, tents and so on, will be based on that group, and that allows it. In terms of insurance, also insurance companies will appreciate to have a very educated idea of the areas impacted and the communities and the people impacted there. So the whole engagement piece comes together like a big effort with the scientific work done here, and communication will be assertive, aid agreements will be effective, and the most important, the municipalities can act with the company in case of emergency. So what are the benefits? Well, we have been talking along the presentation about a lot of reasoning behind the solution that we created, but there are two things that are critical here, is that it's effective planning and community engagement. And effective planning comes also in terms of the operation, as Karen was mentioned, even beside the technology that best work in this region in comparison, and in part of the analysis, what is the region active, their active economic activities or their livelihoods are like. So now they are part of that. So for emergency preparedness is define the site-specific plan and estimate the scope, as I mentioned before, and where we are going to locate these people, and what does it mean in terms of evacuating them from the area. The identify and mitigating mechanisms. We can work with local authorities, training people and training personnel to address emergencies. So it really helps families. It's the same. We are borrowed this concept the same as earthquakes. So in regions that they are very, very much aware of earthquakes, even people know what to do at home. So we would like them to be educated. They will appreciate it. And one of the things that I learned from 20 years of working in the field with communities is that they know risk. They have lived risk either because climate, either because the economic activity is very low and they live in a state of poverty. They know risk because conflict. So now we are going to be educating them ahead in advance to be ready for the risk we never want, but at least we take the consideration. And the Emergency Operations Center, where will be the best place to locate it? Is it going to be in the picture we have close to the city, or probably have a far distance, and what are the access roads that we have to reach there? But as I mentioned before, we don't want them to live in tents. Now we want them to go back to their life. So it's a post-disaster planning that has to go there. And it's also part of planning, and for companies, it's a part of the business case. Budgets to be ready, or access to resources that have to be immediately ready to support these communities. And also at the same time to support the operation of the mine, because if you are taking this act responsibly, there is a big chance the mine can continue. Yes, it's a challenge, but it won't have a great impact in the social license because you are taking risk mitigations. So the post-disaster is an assessment of social, economic, and environmental. The houses provision, the restoring the mean of production, preserving the essential services we're talking about that might be a shortcut in energy or supplies of water and so on, and the reintegration of vulnerable groups, where we saw in the case of Brumadinho, indigenous villages were impacted just by being down the river. It was not expected, but they were there. So that is one of the biggest benefits, and I think the most important one is for companies to have a much more understanding and control of what does it mean in case of a disaster. Yes.
Okay. So just to move on to implementation, like we fully believe that all of this is possible, and really what all it takes is, and I say all it takes because I know culture change is a big challenge as well, but if we can shift practice to be more aligned with what we've already seen in terms of the safety culture in mining, like everybody looks out for each other, they're working to take ownership of managing risks. We have a heightened awareness of not just the folks who actually operate and manage those risks, but also others on the property, and they understand like what are some potential things that can happen in different areas. So we want the same level of awareness, the same level of training and ownership of risk management with respect to tailings. We want to make sure that access to information is very I can hear some typing. We just want to make sure that we can ensure that others on the site always have the right information and who's responsible for what, so that if somebody out in the field sees something that's of question, they're not sure of, they know who to go to, they know who to call right away. We want to be watching for more leading failure indicators rather than lagging, because if we're already seeing movement in the field, we're already seeing, degradation of a facility, that's almost too late, right? We may not have time to repair damages that are in the field. We want to be looking at the leading failure indicators as our critical measures. And I know this is an active practice, so this is one that I think we're doing well on, but it can be always improved by better educating the folks on site of these critical things that they need to watch for. Refusal to work due to unsafe conditions. I would believe that probably most sites would have this in practice already, even with respect to tailings management. But allowing people who don't maybe understand the working area quite as well to question things if they're uncertain, and until the situation is explained and they understand it and realize how things are being controlled, then taking the time to do that is important. And of course, always having some critical continuous improvement on anything that we have in place. Now, externally as well, we both internally and externally, we want to ensure that we are moving more towards interdisciplinary, cross-seniority, internal-external collaboration, and a lot more communications from corporate to operations as well. Clear designation of responsibility for tailings risk management, and letting the external stakeholders understand like who and what is being done, or who is managing things, what is being done to manage risk, and having the way for them to understand that in some layman's terms, so it's understandable. And then, like I said, having an inquisitive environment, so allowing those stakeholders externally as well to question our practices, to rigorously understand it very well, maybe bring them on site for tours to show them what it is that we do, and show them how we communicate and keep on top of things. I think all of these are critical, and having whistleblower practices in place for the fallback measure, that if somebody doesn't feel open and comfortable bringing issues forward, they can at least raise the issue in some capacity so that it is addressed. We know that people are really the key to excellent performance, and that's the only way that we'll get there. So in conclusion, Monica?
Yes. So basically, the whole purpose of the TASR is to be a solution that enables to provide information from the technical side and the social side in an effective way to support the engagement process and to start acting on risk mitigation. So when we started working with Karen on this, we didn't visualize how far this could go. And now we see that it's an effective approach. In social science, most of the time, companies don't have a very factual assessment of the demographics and the areas of impact. And this will allow the industry to have a very clear picture of what is that and how they can act on that, even to put budgets in place if it's needed, or having policies in place according to that. And not even to talk about the benefits in terms of the relationship of trust, because you trust more a company that comes and say, let's start planning for something none of us want, but let's be prepared. So thank you very much. We really hope to have questions and hear from you, and looking for the opportunity to bring the TASR to as many sites as we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica and Karen. Great presentation. Wow, there's so many aspects of this and challenging. I know I have a ton of questions, and there's a bunch of questions here. So let's get going on some of the questions if you're ready for that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first one's from Alistair, and he was wondering if you can point to any good examples of engagement that can be learned from it. It's still early days in implementation of the standards, but yeah.
I couldn't hear well.
Sorry, do you have any good examples yet of engagement that's working well?
Well, in my career, in terms of engagement for this type, not for the case of TASR, it's brand new, and but in terms of engagement around crisis, and it is very reactive. And so far, what I learned is that it creates a lot of anger, because people start kind of thinking why I was not informed in advance. Why, and even more if you're talking about people who sadly died because of a disaster like that, or been injured, this could be prevented. And so this is part of that creates that anger and frustration in communities. I have seen that in other cases. I have seen cases in Mexico where unfortunately tailings failure happened, and it went down the river, and it really created a whole thing that communities impacted react with anger. I trust that if we're able to have the opportunity to mitigate the risk and prevent that, at least people know what to do and what to expect, and companies will know who are impacted and kind of have control on that. But hopefully next time we meet again, we have stories to share about this. Good stories.
Good stories, exactly. He also has a second question that I'm going to go to next, which is, can community engagement and multiple accounts analysis of alternatives be done effectively? And who has done this, and how can you share the process of how it's been done effectively? Multiple accounts analysis?
I couldn't hear well.
Yeah, so I would say the multiple accounts analysis, we actually had a webinar not too long ago specifically on the topic of multiple accounts analysis. And I think that all the aspects that we've discussed here can be easily accommodated in multiple accounts analysis, and probably have been for some of the leading companies who have taken this to heart. I'd say that the community engagement piece could be accommodated in a couple of different ways, and maybe Monica can sort of add to my comments here, but you can either do some engagement prior to doing the multiple accounts analysis, gathering the right information to bring in and have the social practitioners present in that analysis so that they can represent the information well and help everyone to understand those potential differences that may be there. The alternative is, if you're being very open and transparent and you have really good relationships with your communities, is you can bring the information in first, I guess, but also potentially have some representatives from the community who can add some personal perspectives and value to those discussions about educating on the impact of certain aspects and what they would prefer. Not saying that would totally make the decision, but we all know that if communities fully disagree with something being proposed, they will put their foot down, right? So maybe Monica can add some more comments.
Yes. Well, one of the pieces that is interesting right now is that now that we talk a little bit more openly about inclusion and participation, the GISTM and the TSM is just calling precisely for that, having that perspective of the people living in the regions that are impacted. And it is a difficult conversation, and bringing the community comfortable enough to talk about that without panicking means that you have a relationship with the community. And so that it takes us how professional has been the work around community engagement ahead in advance to bring somebody from the community to participate in a discussion that is highly technical, but at the same time is highly impactful to their livelihoods. So I think that on that end, ideally, these conversations should happen quite ahead in advance and in the early stages. But at the same time, it puts pressure in companies to have a very professional stakeholder engagement approach to know that these difficult conversations will come, and you have to have stakeholders ready to sit down with you comfortable enough to absorb the technical and share the impacts that they perceive.
It's definitely tricky. Sounds
That
tricky.
is the tricky piece, yeah. Yeah, and even more than social, so many times are not taking that serious. So and that is one of the pieces that in my field I feel a little bit frustrated, is that this is very serious. It's the life of people and regions. So how professional we can bring it and elevate it to be taken as technical will probably help also to move it to the next part of the conversation.
Yeah, I wanted to just add, like, that is directly the reason why we need to involve the social practitioners so much more when we talk about these things, because they can help to convey the seriousness of different aspects out to the communities in a better way that we technical folk might try to do, and vice versa. They can help explain to the technical folks really what it means for the community members who may interpret things in different ways.
That's a really good point. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. This also leads to another question we have, which is, what are your thoughts on extractive companies stating, for a number of reasons, they don't want or need to engage with communities and other stakeholders until they find the mineral and during the exploration of tailings? So that's why, yeah.
Right, like not engaging too early because they don't want to make commitments, for example, right? I don't know, Monica, maybe you want to comment on that
well,
one?
I think this is cultural, and we were just, when we were doing the analysis about that culture, we both found very interesting pieces in our discussions while planning this. Number one, many times the technical team of the people in operation are not brought to the community engagement meetings. No, you don't tell the community this. No, it's too technical. They can, and we underestimate communities. So I think that is part of the problem. And sometimes we tend to also not to bring people from community relations because they are too touchy-feely. So we have these judgments of both, either too engineering, too complicated, or too much emotions on the other side. Well, guess what? When a tailing failure comes, a disaster comes, it's both. It's emotional, it's heavy, it's touchy-feeling, it's people, and it's anger, and it's NGOs and activists, and you just escalate it. So I think that important part of this is acknowledge that the conversation is needed. Let's start very factual. This discussion is needed. And take it once again, the social from the technical perspective, because social bring data too. You talk about regions, you talk about people living, their economic activities, the use of land, the shared water resources or the shared resources. So this is also technical. So you can combine that, and that is what precisely what we are trying to do here is that we can create the data to be analyzed from the technical, and we can start the conversation. The use of language and how you engage communities, and either you move down the use of language or you elevate it according to the profile and the characterization of the communities, will define our ability to communicate. But this is totally different. But the discussion prior in the assessing, or if it's a planning and determining where the best area for tailings, or I'm comfortable enough with the company as a company to know that the impact will be, as Karen pointed in her example, point A addressing straight a city of 60, we say like 800,000 people or so. And I don't even know that that would be in front of me, but I made that decision a long time ago. So right now, my tailing failure will be multiple, I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar thing because I'm in front of 100,000, 200,000 population in front of me. So all of these things could be assessed before, and this is how the value and the professional approach on both sides it helps on that having the conversation. So I will say that no fear the conversation. Let's think of that as a need. It's a needed conversation that can be taken from the professional perspective and landed in factual issues and factual solutions that, as Karen and I have learned a lot from Karen these years, is kind of their tri-tailing. So there are different solutions that could be brought into it if we really understand what is in front of us. But right now, we are that.
I think what I would add here is that we all have seen the cases where permits aren't approved for projects when stakeholders aren't engaged early enough.
Yeah.
And where decisions have been made by a mining organization that they try and push on a community. And so I think if we go in with the open discussion, the frank conversation to say, these are the opportunities that we're looking at. This is how we want to work together to bring opportunity to the region as well as to the mining organization. And you want to work together to figure out how you can do it safely, how you can do it without any like significant impacts to the environment, and how communities can become involved in making those decisions, because we've also on the flip side seen a lot of communities who are now taking ownership of developments and making those decisions themselves that they do want to develop in certain places, and they're willing to take on some risks, but they're informed about those risks. They're the ones making the decisions about it, and they're involved with how those risks are being managed. So I think that is an important thing to consider in terms of when we start to engage. Like the earlier the better is always been my motto, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is the data collection. I think that projects are very limited only to comply with environmental impact assessment. And The environmental impact assessment goes as far as it goes. But there are many other components in the development of a mine that we cannot expect, and it's not because it's good or bad, it's just we cannot expect the EIA to answer all the questions. We can't. So this is when we think about responsible mining, is that awareness that impacts happen outside of the concession area. And that, as a responsible miner, I want to be aware of it. This is voluntary, this is a reputation, this is the social license, this is the lifetime of the project, this is investors, and right now ESG and risk. So obviously all of this right now comes into consideration. So I would just say that it's important that we recognize that impacts go beyond the concession area, as simple as it sounds. But it is the fact. Huh?
It is. Thank you. Cognizant that I think it's coming up on the hour here, and I know there's some people that need to drop off, but I do want to say thank you so much. I'd like to carry on this conversation if people are willing to stay on and listen, but because I think we still have some questions, but before some people take off, do want to say thank you so much to Karen and Monica, and I know there's tons more to discuss, so I want to make sure that people are welcome to reach out to you too and discuss this more. So thank you so much. And also remind everybody that CIM for the 2023, the abstracts are open. Karen, do you have any other announcements before people take off?
Yeah, I guess if anyone is not aware, there is a tailings conference coming up in just a couple more weeks here in Denver, Colorado. It's called the Tailings and Mine Waste Conference. So registration is open. There's a number of workshops on the weekend prior, and there'll be a lot of conversation happening there. It's a really good conference to attend if you're able. Yeah, and then, yeah, just to emphasize, we are waiting for abstracts to come in for this conference coming up in May. So if you have some ideas, please put them in.
Great. So for those of you, can we stick around for a couple more questions before we close up?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Thank you for those who attended as well. So one of the questions is, how much will a multidisciplinary approach will extend the decision time? Like getting all these more people involved in the company and in the community, like, does that extend the time for decisions?
I guess that's a good question. It depends on how much you are doing to engage direct engagement with the communities through that process, as opposed to compiling information. Like, you know, compiling all of this information can be done at the same time as the technical analysis that we might need to gather more information to compare them on that technical front. So, you know, while you're doing studies out in the field to understand the ground conditions or do some modeling on watershed or things like that, at the same time frame, social studies can be being performed at the same time, so that when you come to do the analysis, the comparison, you have all the information at the same time. And you know, I guess the one piece that could extend the time frame is that direct engagement, if particularly if you want to say narrow the selection based on certain criteria and then present that to the community to help make the final decision based on those outcomes. Like, I guess it depends on the relationship a little bit there too. If they're working with you already, then it's more managing the schedule ahead of time. So if you know when you're going to do it, you can plan ahead to plan the meetings that would come following through, and not worry about delaying too much. Don't wait until you're at that point to schedule it, is all.
Well, I will say that the culture of the company defines also that approach to the multidisciplinary. There are companies that are much more open about its information disclosure or sharing information between business areas, and that helps the conversation a lot. Sometimes if they're very close in keeping information kind of confidential or secret, it will be very difficult for other colleagues to bring their inputs and share ideas or reviews. And that is critical part in the decision making. If the culture is open to share and transparency, and I mean, this piece with transparency, I always mention because we tend to think that transparency is that you just go naked in life. No, transparency is that you are clear about points that you want to open the conversation and you're open to learn from other views. So if you have that culture of transparency and information disclosure and sharing information, it is a big chance the conversation happens. And it's a big chance that colleagues voluntarily will bring ideas and help that. And that will translate to communities. Because imagine that if it's a culture of transparency and openness, it will go, it really go down the organization, and even community relations and people on site know that it's okay to talk. It's okay to share reports. It's okay to share data. So they will be more inclined to do that. So that's why Karen and I dedicated one exclusive slide to talk about cultural change around values on this, because it is critical for this to happen. It has to come from the top all the way down, so people are comfortable to share and decisions are made in a team. Educated decisions, probably it's a big chance that they are successful on that.
That kind of goes back to making cultural changes in the company, right? So, yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, it's
Andres had a follow-up question to the previous one about reluctance to engage early. And he was saying, and he's speaking to a mining company in Peru that is waiting on the government's approval for reprocessing tailings to engage with 13 communities. So this is to say that government regulations are key to force companies to engage early enough with it. So
Sorry, it was really hard to hear what you just said, and I can't see the questions in the.
I hear about
Sorry.
government regulations, but I missed the other part.
Yeah, sorry. So the government and regulators are forcing the company to engage early before they're ready, maybe, as opposed to necessarily a full reluctance, but they're forcing them possibly before they're ready. How did you manage that?
Well, I don't know, is that related to the permitting process? I mean, because right now we see a big trend about public participation. And that's probably, I mean, I hope if that's the case, the public participation is when I call it very colloquially, the democratization of permits. Because sometimes governments, they want just now, they don't, politically, they don't want to take the risk of giving the yes to a mine or not. Because it might be a big political liability for some people. So they decided that communities will make the decision. And now with inclusion and participation, it just goes very well under that umbrella. And the fact that you have to go to communities to inform them in advance of permits, it represents a risk and an opportunity. It is a risk, and what goes back again, how far from even from early exploration when you were doing prospecting, how much you inform the community, how good is the relationship? Because if you bring a conversation about tailings in a conflicted relationship, it is a bomb and it's not going to go well, because you're talking about the most challenging risks they have and the fear about impacting water resources and their land and so on, even resettlement or so on. So if you don't have that relationship and you bring in this and you plan to obtain a permit, it is a big risk that public participation won't be a success. And you have to go through that. So governments are putting pressure, yes, because it's a political ticket, yes. But right now it tells us as an industry that if this is a trend that and actually I see it as a trend, we as an industry, we really need to invest and work in social engagement very, very early to have a relationship to
So I hear the question though around like, what do you do when you're being forced to engage before maybe you have all the information? And I think the important thing is to be open to say, you know what, these are the things that we are proposing to do. This is the work that we're doing, that we are looking for answers to before we can make decisions, and take the opportunity to sort of give some of that base information, the things that you're doing, the things that you're looking at, the studies that are taking on, and use the opportunity to ask the questions of what they are concerned about. What questions would they want answered to assure them that this is a good project moving forward, that it's going to be safely done. And I'm going to reflect like on a case, it was in Norway, project, and I apologize, but I can't remember what the project name was. I just remember that they went ahead and had to do a full engagement prior to doing all of their feasibility studies. And what they did was they went out and proposed what they were doing, and what they were comparing was putting a sort of tailings facility on land in different places in amongst a bunch of fjords and very close to the communities, as opposed to putting it down in the water subaqueously. And their preference was to put it in the water because it was actually the most safe and stable there. But they went through the process of asking all of the different stakeholders of what they would need to be assured of so that they would say yes. And in doing that, it basically set up all of the studies that they did need to do that they hadn't yet done. And they were able to answer all those questions, get a permission for the facility, for the materials to be placed under water in the bottom of the fjord, and had a permit for 50 years of their waste disposal in that fashion. And this was all gained prior to them finishing the feasibility studies of the mine itself. So it's a reverse way of looking at it, but if you can ask the questions of what is it that they would need to know or understand, then you can start to answer their questions, and they can clearly see that they're being heard and that you're addressing their needs as well. So that's my advice on that situation.
But you know, it's interesting, Karen, because when you work on the social impact assessments at the early stage, not all the time the social is mandatory unless you have an IFC compliant too. But when you have the environmental impact assessment and you have the social impact assessment, that you will get a hint of their concerns. I'm not saying it's exactly, but you will get a hint of what is basically the pressure issue for communities. And that probably exactly what you are suggesting will come quite a proactive approach to that, allowing to have some understanding. Jennifer, you have more experience than us on environmental impact assessment. What do you think?
Well, now you're putting me on the spot now.
Well, is that we have an expert in the room.
But I think this is really about communicating. So I think you're definitely on the right track here.
Sorry.
But no, I think you've got it. You've got great points, and I think there's more to be done. I'm excited to see how this is going to play out over time. But you've got some great things, and I think that's the end of our questions. If that's okay. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to all our participants, our lesson listeners who have come in, and this will go on the CIM Academy at some point as well. So, but thank you everyone for your time today, and let's keep the discussion going because this is really important. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.